Emma had always known that being a nurse in a busy city hospital would be exhausting. The long hours, the endless stream of patients, and the emotional toll of caring for those in their darkest moments. But despite the constant strain, Emma never let it show. She had learned early on to mask her fatigue behind a warm smile, offering comfort to patients who were often facing their own battles. It was part of her nature. As a single mom, she had learned to keep going even when she felt like she couldn't. That evening, as she walked into the ward to start her shift, Emma had no idea that her life was about to take a turn. She had been assigned to care for Julian Rivers, a reclusive tech mogul who had been admitted for a seemingly minor injury. The hospital had a few high-profile patients here and there, but Julian was different. His name had become synonymous with success, innovation, and a lifestyle that few could ever hope to attain. But the whispers surrounding him had always been tinged with mystery. He was known to be aloof, withdrawn, and obsessed with keeping his private life behind closed doors. Emma had heard the stories, everyone had, but she hadn't expected to meet him like this. In a sterile hospital room, lying in a bed, vulnerable and broken. As Emma entered the room, she was immediately struck by the coldness in his eyes. Julian didn't acknowledge her when she stepped into the room. His gaze was fixed on the window, distant, as though he were somewhere else entirely. Emma cleared her throat softly, announcing her presence, but Julian remained silent. His aloofness was palpable, and Emma couldn't help but wonder what had led him to this point. Was it just the injury, or was there something more to his condition than met the eye? She had seen patients with much worse injuries, yet they had been far more engaged and communicative than Julian. But there was something about him, something unsettling. Maybe it was the way he clung to silence, or how he seemed to shrink further into himself every time she spoke. Whatever it was, Emma's instincts told her that there was a story here. A story buried behind that steely exterior. A story that no one had been able to uncover. As she took his vitals, Julian's eyes flicked over to a small object on the table beside the bed. At first, Emma didn't pay much attention. It was just a scrap of paper, tucked under a hospital pen. But there was something odd about it, something that made her pause. It looked like a torn piece of a larger sheet, and the edges were frayed, as if it had been handled repeatedly. The message on it was barely legible, but the urgency in the way it was positioned made Emma feel uneasy. She glanced at Julian, who had noticed her looking at the object. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, Emma felt a wave of tension that she couldn't explain. Julian's face remained stoic, but there was something in the way he reacted that sent a chill down her spine. His gaze flickered toward the paper, and then he quickly turned away, pretending not to notice her interest. It was subtle, but Emma could sense it. Julian had something to hide. It wasn't just about the injury or his reserved nature. The torn paper, the cryptic message, his sudden shift in demeanor. It all pointed to something deeper, something more personal. Emma had seen it before. When a person was guarding something, you could feel it in the air, like a pressure waiting to be released. She continued with her duties, trying to push the thought out of her mind, but the torn paper kept haunting her. As she left the room that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that Julian Rivers wasn't just a reclusive billionaire hiding from the world. There was something more, something far darker, that he wasn't ready to reveal. That night, after her shift ended, Emma found herself replaying the encounter in her head. Why had Julian reacted that way when she looked at the torn paper? What did it mean? It wasn't just an ordinary scrap of paper. It had significance, and it had clearly made Julian uncomfortable. She had been around enough people in the hospital to know that when someone's defenses were that high, it usually meant they were hiding something. But what could Julian, a man who had everything, possibly be hiding? Emma's curiosity gnawed at her as she climbed into her car and started the drive home. She couldn't help but wonder if the torn paper was a clue to a mystery that no one else had been able to unravel. She had worked in hospitals for years and had seen all kinds of patients, but Julian's presence in that room felt different. His silence wasn't just the result of an injury. It felt like a barrier that kept anyone from getting too close. But Emma had never been one to back down from a challenge. If Julian was hiding something, she would find out what it was. The next day, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Julian. The image of his cold, distant face and the torn paper kept resurfacing. She had to know more. She was determined to uncover the truth behind the tech mogul's guarded demeanor, even if it meant stepping into a world that was far beyond her usual hospital rounds. What had caused Julian to become this way? And why was he so intent on hiding whatever it was? As she prepared for her next shift, Emma resolved that she wouldn't let the mystery slip away. The torn paper, the cryptic message, and Julian's intense reaction, they were all signs of something more. Emma just didn't know yet how deep the rabbit hole would go, but she was about to find out. And that was just the beginning. The questions lingered in her mind as she made her way back to the hospital. What would she discover? And how far would she go to uncover the truth behind the tech mogul's silence? The answers were still waiting to be found, but they weren't going to come easily. The following morning, Emma's mind was still reeling from the events of the night before. Julian Rivers' enigmatic presence lingered in her thoughts, and despite the exhaustion from her overnight shift, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply amiss. Julian, with his cold eyes and tight-lipped demeanor, seemed to hold a secret. Something more than just the injury that brought him to the hospital. Emma had seen her fair share of guarded patients, but Julian's walls were unlike any she had encountered before. The torn paper, the shift in his behavior when she noticed it, it all pointed to something far more personal, something buried beneath the surface, and Emma couldn't help but feel drawn to uncover it. Her shift began again that day, and as fate would have it, Emma found herself face to face with Julian once more. She entered his room quietly, taking in his still form. He was awake but silent, staring at the window as if lost in a world of his own. His cold, distant expression hadn't changed, and Emma knew it would take more than just routine care to break through his defenses. She needed to approach him differently. She adjusted his bandage carefully, working efficiently but with a soft touch. As her fingers moved across his skin, she noticed something unexpected, a tattoo on his forearm. It wasn't large, but it was visible enough to catch her attention. The tattoo was a symbol, a logo of a company he had founded years ago. Emma recognized it immediately. She had read about the company in the news, but she hadn't made the connection until now. The company, once a pioneer in tech, had recently been under intense scrutiny. There had been rumors of unethical practices, a scandal that led to its downfall. Emma's curiosity spiked. Was this the reason Julian had withdrawn from the world? Was his reclusive nature linked to the failure of his empire? As she continued tending to him, Emma let the question linger in her mind. She had always believed that a person's actions could often be traced back to their past, and Julian's actions, or rather, his complete avoidance of interaction, seemed to echo the same sentiment, but Julian wasn't ready to talk about it. He remained as silent as ever, offering little more than short, clipped responses. He didn't want to share, and Emma understood that, but her instinct told her that if she was patient enough, he would eventually open up. For the next several hours, Emma took a gentler approach, striking up light, casual conversations. She didn't want to push him too hard, but she needed to find a way to connect with him. Slowly, his defenses started to soften. When she asked about the pain from his injury, he didn't respond with his usual coldness. Instead, there was a flicker of something deeper, something that hinted at the burden he was carrying. "I've had worse," Julian muttered quietly, as if the words were more to himself than to Emma. "But it doesn't matter. It's nothing compared to what I've been through." Emma knew there was more to it than just the physical injury. She had seen it in the way Julian avoided talking about anything personal, how he shut down at the slightest mention of emotions. But she also sensed a weariness in him, something that was far more than just the fatigue of illness or injury. He was worn down, emotionally drained, and Emma could see that. She paused for a moment, considering her next move. Then, in an effort to comfort him, she spoke gently. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, Julian, but sometimes letting it out can help." The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. And then, almost reluctantly, Julian spoke again. His voice was low, his words measured. "I don't know how to explain it. I thought I had it all figured out, but it all fell apart. Everything I built. It's gone now." It wasn't much, but it was something. Emma could feel the emotion behind his words, the bitterness and disillusionment that tinged his voice. This wasn't just about losing a business empire. There was a pain deeper than that. Emma's heart ached as she listened. She had heard that Julian Rivers, once hailed as a genius in the tech world, had lost everything, his company, his reputation, and his place in the industry. But it was clear now that the failure of his business was only one part of the story. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" Emma asked, keeping her tone soft and inviting. But Julian was not ready to go there. He shifted uncomfortably, his face hardening. "I don't need to talk about it," he replied curtly. "It's in the past." Emma could see the wall going back up, stronger than before, but she wasn't discouraged. She knew this was a man who had built his entire life around control, around keeping others at arm's length, and Emma knew that breaking through that kind of shell would take time. The hours passed, and as the day wore on, Julian's guard began to slip just a little more. He told Emma, in brief and halting words, about his sister, Lila. She had been the one person in his life who had understood him, who had shared his dreams and ambitions. Together they had planned to create something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting impact on the world. But Lila's sudden death had shattered everything. Julian's eyes clouded over with pain as he spoke of her, and for the first time Emma saw the true depth of his grief. It wasn't just the business that had crumbled, it was the personal loss, the void left by his sister's death that he had never allowed himself to mourn. Julian had been so focused on his work, his company, that he had never truly processed the pain of losing Lila. It was this that had driven him into seclusion. It was this that had kept him locked away from the world. As he shared this fragment of his story, Julian paused for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Emma's, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something that resembled trust. Emma felt a shift in the air. The emotional wall between them had cracked, even if only slightly. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He handed it to Emma without a word. The photograph was of a young woman with a bright smile, standing next to Julian in what looked like a family photo. "This is Lila," he said softly. "She was everything to me." Emma held the photograph, her heart breaking for him. She understood now that Julian's loneliness ran much deeper than she had first thought. It wasn't just about his failed business or his public persona. It was the weight of loss, of unspoken grief, that had shaped him into the man he was today. As the chapter closed, Emma's mind raced. She had uncovered a glimpse of the man behind the mask, but how much deeper did this story go? And how far could she push him to open up before he shut down completely? Her compassion for Julian was growing, but she still wondered how much of his painful past she should probe. Could she truly help him heal, or would she only make things worse by pushing him too hard? As the days went by, the trust between Emma and Julian deepened. Julian's guarded nature had started to crumble, albeit slowly. There were moments now, brief but telling, where he would open up, revealing pieces of his painful past. Emma had always sensed that there was more to Julian than his cold, aloof exterior. He had a heart buried under layers of loss, anger, and regret, and she was beginning to understand that. One afternoon, as Emma carefully adjusted his bandages, Julian's tone shifted. His voice, once terse, now carried a weight of sadness that he couldn't hide. "Lila," he began, his eyes fixed on the floor, "wasn't just my sister. She was my closest ally, my best friend. The one person who truly understood me." Emma listened intently, her heart aching for him. Julian's words were tentative, as if he had never allowed himself to speak them out loud. "We had dreams, you know. We planned to build something, a company, a legacy, together. But everything changed in an instant." His face contorted as he spoke, and Emma could see the pain in his eyes, the rawness of a wound that had never healed. Julian's sister Lila had died in a tragic car accident several years ago. The loss of her had shattered Julian, sending him into a deep depression. He became a shadow of the man he once was, burying himself in his work and distancing himself from the world around him. Emma could feel the weight of his grief, the hollow emptiness that lingered with every word he spoke. "I didn't know how to cope," Julian continued. "So I threw myself into my work. I told myself that if I just kept moving, kept building, I could outrun the pain, but I couldn't." Emma's heart went out to him as he spoke of Lila's death, the overwhelming loss that had haunted him for years. He confessed that after her passing he had locked himself away emotionally, refusing to allow himself to feel anything. "There was a letter," Julian said almost in a whisper. He looked at Emma with a trace of vulnerability. "The paper you saw. It was the last letter Lila ever wrote. She wrote it the night before the accident. It was full of her hopes, her dreams for the future. I've kept it all these years." Emma's hand shook slightly as Julian handed her the torn piece of paper. The letter, now worn and fragile, seemed to hold within it the weight of a future never realized. The ink had faded, but the words still carried the echoes of a life cut short. Emma held it carefully, the gravity of the moment sinking in. She understood now that this letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the embodiment of Julian's grief, a constant reminder of the dreams he had shared with his sister, dreams that would never come true. The chapter ended with Emma gazing down at the letter in her hands. She could feel the weight of Julian's pain, the depth of the emotional wound he had carried for so long. It wasn't just the loss of a sister, it was the loss of a future, of a vision they had once shared. Emma's heart ached for him, and she wondered how she could help him heal. Could he ever let go of the past and move forward, or would the weight of his grief continue to keep him locked in the shadows? Emma had been watching Julian for days, silently grappling with this growing tension between them. The compassion she felt for him was undeniable, yet she knew she had to approach him carefully. Julian had opened up about his past in fits and starts, but he still wore the wall he'd built around himself like armor. Emma understood that grief was a private matter, but she also realized she couldn't stand by and let him live in isolation forever. His pain was clear, but so was his fear of confronting it. One afternoon, while adjusting his medication, Emma found herself at a crossroads. She had always prided herself on her ability to connect with people, to provide not just physical care, but emotional support when needed. But Julian was different. He resisted every attempt to break through his defenses. Still, she couldn't ignore the silence that hung between them. She sat down beside him, a deliberate move to make him feel less like a patient and more like a person. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the guarded look in his eyes. He wasn't going to open up unless she encouraged him to do so. Slowly she spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "Julian, you've built these walls around yourself. You don't have to keep hiding." His response was sharp, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm fine. I don't need anyone to help me." The words stung, but Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her gaze steady. "You're not fine," she said, "and you're not alone. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." For a long moment, Julian didn't respond. His eyes flickered, the familiar coldness beginning to thaw. It wasn't much, but it was something. Slowly, he started to speak, his voice wavering. He admitted that his fear wasn't just about his past, it was about his future. He told Emma that he feared he had failed his sister. While he had never been able to live up to the dreams they had shared, the dreams she'd written about in her letter. Now, every decision he made felt tainted by his inability to keep her vision alive. "I was supposed to be the one to carry on her legacy," Julian confessed, his voice barely a whisper, "but I let her down, and now I don't think I can ever love again. I'm too afraid to feel that kind of loss again." Emma's heart broke at the vulnerability in his voice. She had seen his anger, his bitterness, but now she saw something deeper. A man who had given up on hope, convinced that any connection he formed would only end in heartache. But Emma wasn't ready to give up on him. She knew that healing was a long road, but it started with a simple step. After a moment of silence, Emma extended a small but sincere invitation. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "Come have dinner with me. Not as a nurse and patient, but as two people willing to take a chance on something real. We don't have to talk about everything, just a chance for something different." Julian hesitated, the doubt in his eyes clear, but after what felt like an eternity, he finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "All right," he said, his voice low. "I'll come, but I'm not sure I'm ready." Emma smiled gently, relief flooding through her. This wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a step. The first step towards breaking down the walls Julian had so carefully built around himself. As the chapter ended, both Emma and Julian were left with a sense of anticipation. They were moving forward, but how far would they go? Could dinner be the beginning of something that would change both of their lives? Only time would tell. Emma and Julian's dinner marked the beginning of a slow but genuine connection between them. The evening unfolded quietly, with small tentative steps toward understanding each other. Over the course of the night, there were moments of laughter, awkward silences, and soft glances that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Emma couldn't remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with someone, especially someone like Julian, who had so carefully kept his distance. Julian, too, was beginning to soften, letting down the walls he had spent years building. As they sat across from each other, Emma couldn't help but notice how different he seemed outside of the sterile hospital room. Here, in the warm light of a small restaurant, Julian was no longer just the aloof billionaire. He was a man who had once dreamed of a future with his sister, a man who still had hopes, who still believed that there could be something better beyond the pain of his past. His smile, though rare, held a sincerity that made Emma feel like she was seeing the real Julian for the first time. In one quiet moment as they shared dessert, Julian's expression turned serious. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust anyone again," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "After Lila's death, I closed myself off. It felt easier than risking the pain of losing someone again." Emma listened, her heart aching for him. "But with you," Julian continued, "I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Like I can finally breathe again." Emma was taken aback by his honesty, his vulnerability. She had seen him as a man hardened by loss, but now she saw someone who was slowly learning to open up again. In turn, she found herself sharing things she hadn't spoken about in years, her own fears, her own struggles. The conversation shifted between their shared moments of joy and the painful realities they both faced. As the evening came to a close, Emma felt a sense of hope stirring within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Julian's walls were starting to come down, and maybe, just maybe, so were hers. As they stood up to leave, their hands brushed together. The simple touch sent a spark of warmth through Emma. It was a fleeting moment, but in that brief connection something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them had expected it, but it was a step forward, one they both needed, though neither knew where it would lead. In the days that followed their dinner, the bond between Emma and Julian continued to grow. Their conversations evolved from small talk to more meaningful exchanges. Julian, once reserved and distant, slowly allowed Emma to see a side of him that very few had witnessed. His vulnerability, once buried beneath layers of mistrust, began to surface, and Emma could feel the change. Despite this newfound openness, Emma still sensed that Julian was holding something back. She could see it in the moments when he would withdraw, his eyes clouding over as if trying to hide a deeper pain. There was more to his story, something he wasn't ready to share. But Emma was patient, knowing that trust couldn't be rushed. She gave him the space he needed while continuing to offer her support. Then, one evening, Julian surprised her with an unexpected invitation. As they sat together, he looked at her with a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. "I want you to come with me," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I have a place by the lake. It's secluded, but it might be just what we need." The invitation took Emma by surprise. A weekend away, alone with Julian, at his private retreat. She hesitated, unsure of what it would mean for their relationship. It felt like a leap of faith, one that could either bring them closer or push them further apart. Despite her doubts, something about the sincerity in Julian's voice made her want to take the chance. She accepted, though her mind raced with questions. What was he hoping for? And what did this weekend mean for them? As they drove to the lake house, Julian began to open up more. He spoke about the weight of his family's expectations and his need for solitude. "I've never let anyone in like this," he admitted, his voice low. "And it scares me," Emma reassured him, her tone gentle. "I'm not here to change you, Julian. I'm just here to support you." The chapter ended with Emma's heart racing, unsure of what was to come, but knowing that she was taking a leap of faith. At the lake house, Emma and Julian's bond grew stronger with each passing day. They spent the weekend in each other's company, talking, laughing, and sharing quiet moments of intimacy. Away from the noise of the outside world, they began to peel back the layers that had kept them apart for so long. Julian, once so guarded, opened up more about his business failures. He spoke of the mistakes he had made in his career, the opportunities he had squandered, and the burden of disappointment he carried. His sister's death, too, was a constant shadow over his words. The loss had shattered him, leaving a deep void in his sense of self. As the weekend progressed, Emma could see that Julian was beginning to face the things he had long tried to bury. However, even with this progress, there was still something beneath the surface that he hadn't fully addressed. Emma could sense it. A deeper struggle, something more than just his career or the death of his sister. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting long shadows on the walls, Julian's facade finally cracked. His emotions, which he had worked so hard to suppress, came rushing out. He spoke in broken sentences, his voice trembling with the weight of years of unspoken grief. "I've been afraid," Julian admitted, his eyes red and raw. "Afraid to let anyone in. I thought love only leads to loss. I didn't want to feel that again." Emma listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She had seen the strength he tried to project, but now she saw the depth of his pain. As Julian wiped his tears away, Emma spoke gently. "You don't have to keep hiding, Julian. You can choose to embrace love despite the fear." The chapter ended with Julian's gaze fixed on her, vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't sure which path to take, but Emma had given him a choice. As the days passed, Julian continued to wrestle with his fear of love. The walls he had built around himself were strong, and despite the emotional breakthroughs they had shared, he remained hesitant to let go completely. He wanted to open his heart to Emma, but his past haunted him, filling him with doubt. The pain of losing Lila, the failure of his business, the fear of facing more loss, it was all too overwhelming. Yet Emma's presence, her patience, and her unwavering support made him yearn for a different life, one where he could take a chance on love again. Emma, for her part, found herself falling deeper for Julian. Each day she saw the cracks in his armor, the raw vulnerability that he had hidden for so long. She was ready to give him her heart, but she knew he had to take the first step. It was a delicate balance, and she couldn't force him to open up before he was ready. She was patient, but she also feared that time might slip away without Julian ever truly confronting the emotional barriers that kept him isolated. That fear intensified when Julian was faced with a crucial decision in his career. A major business deal loomed large, one that would define his future. His reputation was on the line, and he was forced to choose between taking a risk that could either rebuild his empire or send everything crashing down. As the pressure mounted, Emma stood by his side, offering him comfort and reassurance. She reminded him that he didn't have to face the world alone, that love and support could be a source of strength, not weakness. In the end, Julian made a bold move in his business life, sealing the deal that would shape his future. But before he could fully exhale, he found himself confronting the more personal, terrifying decision: whether to trust Emma with his heart. The moment was charged with tension as they faced each other, the weight of his past and future pressing down on them both. Emma watched him carefully, wondering if he would take the plunge and finally let her in. Julian finally took the plunge, not just in his business but in his relationship with Emma. After days of inner turmoil and hesitation, he made a decision that would secure his career and his future. The major business deal he had been contemplating was no longer just about success or failure. It was about embracing the risk that came with it, and with it, the risk of letting people into his life again. The choice was monumental, but in the end, Julian chose to take a step forward, both professionally and personally. As the dust settled from the business decision, Julian found himself in a quiet moment with Emma, the weight of his actions settling over them. For the first time he looked at her with a vulnerability that had eluded him for so long. In that stillness, with no distractions, Julian finally spoke the words he had kept locked away. "I love you," he confessed, his voice steady but full of emotion. Emma was taken aback, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his words. The walls that had once stood between them now seemed like a distant memory, swept away by the gravity of his confession. Without hesitation, Emma responded, her heart full. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Their words hung in the air between them, a declaration that marked a new chapter in their relationship. They had both taken a leap of faith, trusting each other in a way neither had expected. The chapter ended with them sharing a tender kiss, of a quiet moment of connection that seemed to promise a future together. But even in that moment of intimacy, a sense of uncertainty remained. Could they navigate their future, or would the shadows of their pasts continue to haunt them? Only time would tell. As Julian and Emma's relationship began to grow more public, they found themselves facing a new set of challenges. Julian's tech empire, which had already been under scrutiny for years, was thrust back into the spotlight. His recent business decisions, coupled with his personal life now intertwined with Emma's, became the subject of intense media attention. The world was watching, and the pressure of living under a microscope began to take its toll. The barrage of questions, assumptions, and speculations from the press left little room for privacy. Julian, once fiercely protective of his personal life, was now forced to confront the reality of being a public figure. Emma, too, felt the weight of this new scrutiny. She had never expected her relationship with Julian to attract such attention, and while she had grown accustomed to the quiet intimacy they shared, the sudden exposure was something neither of them had fully prepared for. Despite the growing scrutiny, Julian and Emma's connection remained steadfast. The love they had shared, built over time and trust, was stronger than the outside world's judgment. They stood together, unwavering in their commitment to one another. Even when faced with harsh public opinions and invasive questions, they learned to navigate the media storm together, relying on each other for support. The chapter ends with Julian and Emma stepping into the public eye, hand in hand. They were no longer just facing the world, as individuals, but as a couple, ready to take on whatever challenges the future might bring. In that quiet yet powerful moment, they knew they had made it through the hardest part, and whatever came next, they would face it together. As Emma and Julian continued to navigate their relationship, they were acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. Though they had come so far together, the road forward was far from smooth. Julian's career remained in flux. While he had made strides in regaining control over his business, the pressure of his past mistakes continued to loom over him. His future, though brighter, was still uncertain. Each decision he made had far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for those who depended on him, including Emma. Emma, too, found herself at a crossroads. Her role in Julian's life had grown deeper, but with that came a complexity she hadn't fully anticipated. As a mother, her priorities were always divided between her family and her own aspirations. Her relationship with Julian, while fulfilling, added another layer of responsibility to her life. Emma knew she couldn't fully dedicate herself to one without the other's suffering. She had to balance her own personal growth with her role as a partner and a mother, a challenge that often felt overwhelming. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Julian's home, they spoke openly about the future. The weight of their respective journeys was apparent in their voices, yet there was a quiet understanding between them. They both knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But in that conversation, they also realized that no matter what came next, they would face it together. With their hands intertwined, Emma and Julian shared their dreams for the future, a future that, despite the uncertainty, they would build side by side. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that, in itself, was enough to carry them forward.